Welcome to Science with Mrs. Stone from Advancing Science at Gettysburg College. Today we are going to talk about habitat dioramas. Habitat dioramas are found in natural history museums around the world. If you've ever been to the State Museum in Harrisburg, you've seen some of these habitat dioramas. They are museum exhibits that show how animals in their natural habitat. When we look at these dioramas, we can learn more about the ways that animals interact with one another and also with their habitat. Most of the dioramas that we see in museums are over 100 years old. To originally create these dioramas, scientists and artists would have traveled all around the world to observe animals in their natural habitat. Scientists would have collected plants and animals to bring back to the museum, to add to the museum collection, both for display and also for study. Artists would have sketched the natural habitats of these animals so that they could bring back the sketches to their museum and use those to create background paintings for these dioramas that would accurately represent what the animal's habitat looked like. Dioramas include three major parts. They include a background landscape that's usually like a sky, maybe some far-off mountains or trees. Second, they include a foreground, the part nearest to the viewer, and those include things like plants and rocks and branches, soil. Also, they include taxidermy specimens. So those are the actual plants and animals. Here's an example of a habitat diorama from the American Museum of Natural History in New York. And you can see all three parts of the diorama are present. Here in the background, we have our landscape painting. You can see it's a snowy forest. In the foreground, we have some pine needles with snow and also some branches with snow. And we have our taxidermy specimen, our squirrel. In this case, it's an Abert squirrel. Habitat dioramas also include a little caption to teach the viewer something about the animal and how it interacts with its environment. So it says, tree squirrels don't hibernate. So a longer winter coat topped by tassels warms this species while it forages or searches in its high snowy habitat. So this helps to explain why this squirrel is being presented in a snowy habitat. This squirrel doesn't hibernate. It also explains why the squirrel has this long winter coat, because it's staying warm because it doesn't hibernate and it's active during the winter. Here's another example from the American Museum of Natural History. Again, we have our background. We can see the sky and some small trees here in the background. And then if we look to the foreground, we have this rocky slope with some plants. And lastly, we have our marten, which is our taxidermy specimen. If we take a look at the caption, it says martens don't like being exposed in the open. They'd rather stay concealed or hidden in big evergreen trees or underbrush so that carnivorous birds or wild cats can't spot them. And so you can see here in the diorama, the museum employees have positioned the marten, this animal, underneath the bushes so that it represents how it would be interacting with its natural environment. This is how they would behave to stay hidden from their predators. And lastly, we have an Alaskan brown bear. Again, we've got the landscape painting in the background, lots of clouds, snow-covered mountains. In the foreground, we have these grasses and also a water source. And then we have our taxidermy specimens, our two brown bears. So your assignment is going to be to create a habitat for a particular animal. But before you can do that, you need to understand what a habitat is. So it's the place where a plant or animal lives. They can be large or small, but they must provide what an animal or plant needs to be able to survive. So they must provide things like food, water, cover or shelter, that place to be able to hide from your predators, and also a place to raise your young. Now, when we think about an animal's habitat, there are both biotic or living things, living factors, and there are also abiotic or non-living factors. So the biotic, the living factors, include things like the plants and the animals that are living in that habitat. Abiotic, if we think about the prefix a, means not, so not living. The non-living parts of a habitat include things like sunlight and temperature and water and oxygen or air. These are all things that are very important to an animal's survival, but they are not living things. Here in the center, we have soil. Soil has a little bit of both, a little bit of living parts. There's things like microorganisms and worms and other insects that live in the soil, but there's also non-living parts. The soil itself is broken down from rock to help to create the soil. So soil can be listed under both biotic and abiotic. To create your diorama, it's also important to understand your organism's role in the food web. So we know that there are producers. Producers create their own food. They produce their own food. Those are our plants. So down here at the bottom of our food web, we have our plants. Consumers come in a couple of different kinds. Herbivores eat only plants. Omnivores eat both plants and animals, and carnivores eat just meat. So here in our graphic, we can see we have an herbivore here represented by our caterpillar. The herbivore is just going to eat the plant matter. We have a bird here to represent our omnivore. That omnivore may eat this caterpillar, but it may also eat berries or seeds. We have a larger bird here that represents our carnivore, and that carnivore will prey on smaller animals. Eventually, all organisms will die, and they will decompose or rot away. And so some organisms help with decomposition or the rotting away of dead things. Things like mushrooms help to decompose dead things so that the nutrients are returned back to the soil, and then those nutrients can be used to help plants grow to start the cycle over again. Habitat resources are limited. So when you are developing your habitat diorama, you may want to think about, is there any competition happening? Is there more than one of the same kind of animal, and are they competing for resources? Are they competing for food? Are they competing for the good shelter spots? Now, some animals develop what we call a niche to minimize competition. So in this picture over here, we can see that there are several different species of warblers, and they're all living in the same area, but they have a different niche, a different way that they feed in their environment. And because they all have different ways, they can coexist or live together. So each of these different warblers eats in a different part of the tree. So we can see down here at the bottom, the yellow warbler likes to eat in the bottom part of these spruce trees, whereas the bay warbler eats in the middle, and the Cape warbler eats at the top. So because they specialize and they have different parts where they like to feed, it helps to minimize the competition and make sure that there's enough food for everybody. Now it's your turn to create a habitat diorama. You're going to choose a focus animal for your diorama. So you can use something like a stuffed animal or maybe an animal figurine that you have at home. For my habitat diorama, I am going to focus on a skunk. So I have this little skunk stuffed animal. One rule is that your animal must be a real animal. It shouldn't be a pet, and it shouldn't be a unicorn. The next thing you'll need to do is research your animal. Learn a little bit about its habitat needs. Where does it live? What does it eat? Who eats it? When is it active? The National Geographic Kids Animals webpage offers a great place to start your research. Then you'll need to gather some supplies from your house. I'm sure you have plenty of things around that will help to create your habitat diorama. Your teacher may assign you a worksheet to make notes while you are creating your diorama. Don't forget to take a picture of your diorama when you're finished so that you can share it with the class. So here I am at the kids.nationalgeographic.com/animals webpage, and I'm going to do a little bit of research on my skunk. So if I scroll down, you can see that the animals are separated into different types. So my skunk is a mammal, so I'm going to click on the mammals. And then it'll load up lots and lots of different kinds of mammals for me. They are in alphabetical order so that you can easily find your animal that you're interested in studying. Here's the skunk, so I'll go ahead and click on that. And then it will provide some information, some pictures, and some information about the skunk, what type of animal it is. Again, this is a mammal, whether it is a carnivore, omnivore, or herbivore, how big they are, how long they generally live. And then you can continue to read on to learn a little bit more about the habitat requirements for a skunk. I've gathered together all the materials that I need for my skunk habitat diorama. I'll be using stuffed animals, but you can use any kind of animal. Could be a plastic figure, could be something that you draw. Just as long as it's a realistic animal, it will work for this project. I've gathered other materials together as well, including some pieces of wood, some blue beads to represent water, a black piece of construction paper that I used a white colored pencil to draw a night sky, a box, a small plastic container, a Nerf dart, a toilet paper tube, and some fabric. And also this green blanket, which will represent the grass. I have started to arrange my materials, propped the box up in the back, and then taped my landscape picture into the background to represent a night scene. In front of that, I have my skunk, which is on a grassy lawn. In that lawn is a pond. And there's also a tree. I made the tree using the toilet paper tube and the green fabric. Our predator owl is sitting up on top of the tree because the owl is nocturnal, just like our skunk. We also have a wood pile over here in the corner. Next step is to show how the skunk is interacting with its environment. Our skunk is out at night hunting for food. A skunk is an omnivore, which means it eats plants and animals, but tonight it is on the hunt for grubs. Grubs are actually juvenile insects. Insects such as the Japanese beetle fly around as an adult and like to eat leaves from your garden. They'll lay eggs in the soil, and larvae will hatch from those eggs. Larvae are like a caterpillar. The larvae will live in the soil until they go into a pupa phase and then finally emerge as adults, which will fly around in the sky. Skunks like to eat the larval stage, which is living in the soil. So they'll go around your yard smelling for the larva, and they will dig a hole so that they can get to it to eat it. So I wanted to make a hole in my landscape. So I took the plastic container, put it underneath the blanket, and then I pushed the blanket down into the plastic container so that I could make it look like there was a hole in the yard. Now, because there's a hole in the yard, we would expect to see soil. So I took the brown fabric and put it on the top of the hole to represent soil, and then I took the Nerf dart and placed it in the hole there. And that's what the skunk has uncovered as it's been sniffing around and digging in the yard. So the habitat diorama provides everything that our skunk needs. There is shelter that could live in a burrow underneath perhaps this wood pile over here. It has water. We see this pond is located in the neighborhood. It has food. There's lots of grubs living underneath this lawn. And it would also be able to raise its young in the same area here where it finds its shelter. So have fun making your habitat diorama, and don't forget to share a picture with your class.